Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. On today's episode, a powerful voice on Wall Street, the Boardroom, and Onstage, I am honored to be speaking with Carla Harris, Vice Chairman of Global Wealth Management and Head of Multicultural Client Strategy at Morgan Stanley and Board Director at Walmart. Welcome, Carla. I have followed your impressive career and your messages to women, your TED Talks, and your podcast for years. It is such an honor to have you as a guest today.
Well, thank you, Janice. And I am very glad to be on this podcast. And congratulations to you and the messages that you are putting into the marketplace through this podcast and through your guests.
Carla, your life and career is best described by the Harvard case study written about you, and I encourage everyone to read it. It is so inspiring, and it describes your awesome path from consulting to capital markets to vice chairman at Morgan Stanley. And in addition, your extraordinary extracurricular initiatives and activities, and best-selling author of several books, including Strategize to Win, The New Way to Start Out, Step Up, or Start Over in Your Career. A second one, Expect to Win, 10 Proven Strategies for Thriving in the Workplace. And a third, Expect to Win, Proven Strategies for Success from a Wall Street Vet. I have them all, Carla, and I refer to them when I want to know, what would Carla do? And you always provide me with an answer. So thank you for writing those really inspiring and very helpful books.
Oh, and thank you for reading them and owning the pearls, because that I can give advice all day long, but it's up to the reader to embrace them and use them aggressively.
Well, they help a lot of women, and they certainly help, everybody in the corporate world and in entrepreneurs as well. But I wanted to start out at the beginning because you were truly shaped early on in life by those who raised you. So tell us some of those lessons and values that your parents instilled in you and inspired you professionally and personally.
Sure. I'll tell you one of the most important ones was sort of this pursuit of excellence, Janice. And I'd say that came from three primary influences in my life. The first was my grandmother, who was the first female entrepreneur that I ever knew. And she was extraordinarily successful. And she used to always say to me, baby, whatever you be good at it, which meant no matter what I did, give it your all and try to aspire to be the best in it. She used to say, I don't care if you want to be a garbage man. If you want to be the best garbage man swinging on the back of that truck, that's exactly how you prosecute that. And so for me, it was always about excellence. My father always made me feel like I was supposed to do well, like there was nothing special about making A's. That was just what you do. And he used to say, my job is to make sure I take care of you and give you what you need. Your job is to get your lesson. And then my mother would always say to me, Carla, no matter what you do, just be outstanding. Be so outstanding that there's no debate. And I think, frankly, Janice, that was her way of telling me that the world wasn't fair. Because she would say, if you want an A, go out there and get the A+. So even if you get shaved a little bit, you'll still have your A. So all of that, when you put it together, it always about, if you're going to bother to do anything, give it your all. And what I say to professionals today, especially young professionals, sometimes your all will not be good enough, but at least you will have the personal satisfaction of knowing you gave it everything that you had. And eventually you will get the thing that you're going for.
It was interesting in your Harvard Business School case study, too. Your parents didn't give you an extra allowance for that A or A+. It was just expected, right?
That's exactly right. I'll never forget. The story I love to tell is that, I came home one day telling my dad, you owe me a lot of money. You owe me some money. And he said, why? And I said, because I got all A's and so-and-so's mama gave them $1 for every A. So-and-so's dad gave them 50 cents. You owe me some money. And he said, I don't owe you anything. You're supposed to get those A's. You see what happens if you don't get those A's. Bring that home. Right? So translation in my young mind was, oh, okay. Well, that's what I'm supposed to do.
I love it. So, Carla, you are at the top in corporate America as one of the few women and a Black woman Talk about those early on lessons in your career and the aha moments when you started to do some things differently.
Yeah, I'll tell you that the biggest issue as I look back, Janice, is that I bought the whole argument around meritocracy. Every company that came to Harvard Business School, I don't care what industry, whether it was consumer packaging, was technology, financial services, it didn't matter. Every company sold this idea of a meritocracy. If you're smart, and you work hard, keep your head down, you can go right to the top. There's nothing in your way. And so I bought that hook, line, and sinker. And when I started on Wall Street, I felt pretty confident that I could do well. I knew I was smart, magna cum laude, Harvard undergrad, second year honors, Harvard Business School. So, okay, lots of evidence there that I'm pretty smart. I knew that nobody could outwork me. I'm from the South. And even to this day, you cannot outwork Carla Harris. I can work really hard. So I thought, okay, I got a good shot at being successful. But yet when I started out my career, no matter what I did, it wasn't quite working that way. I wasn't sort of the top associate. I wasn't the top in this area. And so I had to figure out what was going on. And my ahas were things like people's perceptions matter a lot in terms of how they deal with you. And the way I translated that in my first book, Expect to Win, perception is a co-pilot to reality. How people perceive you will directly impact how they deal with you. And even though that's chapter 4 in the book, Janice, I tell people that was the most important thing that I learned. I really started to understand how much people's perceptions matter in their interactions with you. So if I have a certain perception that Janice is really smart, that will impact what kind of assignments I give to Janice, that will impact how I view her deliverable. So if I already think she's a superstar, when she turns in her work, I'm going to view her work in a certain way. I have a certain lens that I'm looking through because she's a superstar. If she makes a mistake, it's clearly the exception to the rule. Now, alternatively, if I have a suspect or a negative view of Janice, I'm going to be much more careful about what assignments I give her. I may not give her the high profile assignment that's likely to land in the Wall Street Journal or the assignment that is very, very quantitative. If I have a perception that she might not be able to do it, when she turns in her work, I'm going to look through a certain lens when I look at her work. So maybe I'm looking for the mistakes as opposed to assuming that there are none. So those perceptions are very, very powerful. Now, even more powerful than that, though, is that you as an individual have the ability to train people to think about you in a certain way. And the way you do that is that, first of all, you understand what their lens is. You understand what they think a superstar looks like, what adjectives they ascribe to somebody who is a success or a superstar. And you find where those things intersect with who you are authentically. And then your behavior simply needs to be consistent around those 3 adjectives. Because if you constantly behave that way and you constantly use those adjectives in your language, then when you are not around, you are not in the room and you are being discussed, people will start to describe you in the way you have trained them to think about you.
Huge lesson, huge lesson. Let me switch to a very recent conference that was at Morgan Stanley. On June 25, you spoke to Andrew Ross Sorkin about Morgan Stanley's 5th annual Multicultural Leadership Conference, where you bring together a diverse slate of business leaders and executives. And given the social unrest in this country, what were some of the key takeaways from this conference? What was discussed, and why do you do this every year?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we do this conference, Janice, is that when we started thinking about the multicultural client strategy at Morgan Stanley, one of the first things that we noticed is that there was no conference at all in the marketplace where the most senior African Americans, most senior Hispanics, most senior Asians, and most senior American Indians who are in corporate America or who are in boardrooms, there was no place where they came together for a general leadership conference, not a diversity conference, but a leadership conference, meaning covering the topics that people who are in the C-suite care about today, like cybersecurity, like counterterrorism, like the political environment, like the general global market environment, what's likely to happen with interest rates, what's happening with the growth of the economy, all the things that CEOs think about every day. There was no place in the marketplace where that was. And what provoked this idea was I realized that as a senior leader in a major organization, when I am invited to a general leadership conference, I could count the number of women in the audience. When I was invited to a global women's leadership conference, I could count the number of women of color in the market. So I started asking myself, well, where were people like this was 5 years ago. Where, do people like, at that time, Bernard Tyson or Ken Chenault or Ken Frazier, Ursula Burns, where are they getting their content? So I thought, this might be a void in the marketplace. And Janice, we were right, because every single year we open the conference with a waiting list of at least 100 people to get in, because we keep the conversation tight. We've historically not allowed more than 300 people in so that it could still feel like an intimate conversation and our speakers could feel free to say whatever's on their mind. And I tell you, it's been amazing every year. And every year I've said, boy, I don't know how we top this year. And of course, going virtually, like most conferences this year, I said, oh man, I don't know how this is going to work. And first of all, so we didn't limit it to 300. We had upwards of 500 people on the conference. We had only 4 speakers. It wasn't a full day. We opened it with Ken Frazier speaking to Matthew Harrison, who's our institutional II ranked biotech analyst. And it was an amazing conversation. I mean, Ken is just brilliant. And we followed that with a political conversation with Abby Phillips from CNN and Tom Nides talking about the political landscape, what is being done, where the voids are, what might happen in November, what needs to happen in November on both sides of the aisle. Then we followed that up with a conversation with Darren Walker, CEO and president of the Ford Foundation. And he was just coming off of the heels of a historic transaction in the marketplace where the Ford Foundation issued $1 billion of bonds, some 50-year paper, some 30-year paper. Never before have you seen that kind of public-private partnership to solve society's ills. And he talked about, the change and the evolution of philanthropy. He talked about race. He talked about the social unrest and what's transpiring in boardrooms and what companies could do. And then we closed it up, of course, since we are a global investment bank, we closed it up with the market outlook and a conversation between Ira Kalish, who is the chief economist at Deloitte, and Lisa Shallett, who's our CIO for our wealth management business. And he talked about the macro market environment, and she talked about the micro, what's going to happen in the markets and where do you invest and what's likely to be vulnerable in the market. So it was amazing. So my learnings from that were the following.
And Fraser,
Ken talked a lot about where we stood and Ken Frazier, excuse me. He talked a lot about where we were in terms of vaccine development, what needs to happen, what are the risks of rushing something to market. The fact that the Chinese were obviously working on something, but frankly, in his experience and in his conversations, they were looking to the West to see what we developed first. He talked about the fact that there had never been a vaccine that had gone to market, I think he said before 7 or 8 years, in terms of all of the trials and the studies and the research that have to be done to make sure that it's not only that it works, but that it doesn't cause any, major unforeseen side effects with people, and that it works across all people. He talked about what he had been telling to CEOs, because of course, as a CEO of Fortune 500 company, other CEOs had been calling him on the back of the social unrest. And he said, listen, you gotta check your own house first, and if you are silent, you are, complicit. So it makes sense to make sure that it's clear, but you can't go out there and say anything to the market or put out a statement without checking your own house first, which is very similar to the advice that I give to CEOs, Janice. I say, listen, if the people of color and the women in your organizations are not selling your organization, you need to check the house. because they should be selling your organization first to other potential candidates to get other folks in. And if they're not showing you great candidates, that's a problem, because everybody has a network, and everybody has a network of people who are also really great. So if they're not trying to attract those folks to your organization, you should check that and check out why. Darren talked about the fact that we need to have these courageous conversations. We need to talk about race. He said, as a Black man who's also gay, I was interested as I sat in boardrooms to see that people were much more willing to talk about LGBTQ issues and what they needed to do in that space, and not as quick to talk about it along ethnic lines. What is that? What is it that you will only have one person of color on your board and not more than that? So there were lots of great conversations.
I want to remind our audience that you are listening to a powerful voice on Wall Street, the Boardroom, and Onstage with Carla Harris, Vice Chairman of Morgan Stanley. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the third Thursday of every month. It's a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. Now, I want to return to Carla Harris. Carla, you are often called upon by many CEOs, given the social unrest that is happening in this country, and that many CEOs have stepped up and talked about what they are going to do, both monetarily and also, in terms of investing in giving jobs to people. Because as Ken Frazier has said at Merck, joblessness can lead to hopelessness. So what is some of the advice that you are giving in today's world to CEOs about how to correct some of the ills of the past, but not in a short-sighted way, but short-term and long-term? What are maybe 3 or 4 or 5 things that you would give as advice to CEOs today?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is, and I have said, is, do a real internal audit of where things stand in your own organization. Understand the biases that are there, that have been there for a long time. And frankly, that happen in decisions every single day about who to choose for leadership positions, who to give certain assignments to. Understand those processes. That's number one. Number two, as I just said, Janice, if the people of color and the women in your organization aren't aggressively selling the organization and showing you all great candidates that are external when you get ready to hire, then you can please believe something is going on where they don't feel like this is my organization. And when you have gotten to that sense of belonging, where people are willing to say, my chairman, my CEO, my organization, unless that's happening, then you might have diversity, you might have some inclusion, but you don't have, as my chairman like to calls it, belonging, where they feel like they own it, and therefore they ought to be bringing their very best, not only their labor every day, but the benefit of their external networks to the organization to make the organization best in class. And then the third thing that I've been saying is, now you have an opportunity to move aggressively to transform, or at least move your culture along this continuum, this evolution continuum. And I find, Janice, that many of the CEOs and leaders that I've talked to, part of the reason this hasn't happened before now is because people view this as very difficult, and they don't want to put their own legacy on the line. And when you ask yourself as an individual, why hasn't this happened before? This problem didn't just create itself. We've kind of had an issue for a while, but we could move along. Well, because it is hard work, and because there are some things at risk, people just tend to pass it along to the next leader. And you say to yourself, if you're in the leadership seat today, well, listen, the last 3 CEOs didn't tackle this. Why do I need to tackle it at this point? Well, here's the deal. Chaos breeds opportunity. And we have a whole lot of chaos right now. And the opportunity that is created for you is that we have air cover. So you should move aggressively to make the changes that you need to make to set your organization on a path of success and leadership going forward, because things are only going to get faster. Innovation is only going to become a more dominant competitive parameter than it is today. The country is becoming more diverse. That's going to keep going. So if you want to be the employer of choice, given the millennial demands, and they are becoming the dominant population in the workplace, and they demand, as table stakes, transparency, inclusivity, and feedback, now is the time for you to make those changes. You have air cover that you've never had before. And that air cover is COVID-19 and the social unrest. You can get it done now.
And it is truly is a competitive advantage. Your employees, your shareholders, your customers, and the communities in which you operate are all looking at what do you have, who's at the top. And so if you don't have, diversity, you're just not going to get there. You mentioned on the program with Andrew Ross Sorkin on June 25 also, he said, well, what about quotas in terms of getting more women and underrepresented groups in the C-suite and in the boardroom and at all levels? Are quotas the right way to go? So, and Carla, you said no. You had another answer for him.
That's right. I told him that I'm not a fan of quotas, but I'm a huge fan of targets. And the reason is in most organizations, everyone knows that you cannot manage what you can't measure. So you need some type of measurement. You need a goal. You need a target. So I think it is much more constructive to say, I want to target getting 5 women. I want to target getting 6 senior folks of color. And the beauty of a target, Janice, is that it suggests a goal, but it does not suggest a cap. And the way we have reacted as a world to quotas is that you get there and you're done. And this is not something whether you're ever done. This is something that is continuous if you want to be best in class. So targets help move you down that continuum, but it doesn't cap you. And it gives you the ability now, after you get the muscle of looking for the best talent, the best intellect, no matter what it looks like. Once you get that muscle, then the target idea continues to move you down the path.
And so by what date should we be getting, is there a day and time or like 2025 or 2030? Should we be getting to 50% women and a certain percentage of people of color?
Yeah, I don't think that we should tie ourselves necessarily to a longer term date, because that I think will just give us an excuse or frankly air cover to quote, take our time. This is frankly something that should have been done. And there's no reason why we can't have appreciable movement in 12 months, right? If we're intentional about it and we look at the opportunities, maybe you don't have all the seats available, but you have seats available now that you can actually start to fill that will drive you towards whatever you're trying to get to as a minimum. And most organizations feel that the minimum should be at least the representation in the population. So to your point, if women are 50, 51%, then you should be targeting that. If African Americans are 13, 14%, you should be targeting that, and so on, is what people think at a minimum they should look like to represent society.
So in 2019 at the Women's Forum Breakfast of Corporate Champions, I started in 2011, we honored 123 companies that were at 30% or more. And the national average then was 27.2%. So we're looking at doing the program again in 2021. We do it every 2 years. And I'm looking at maybe upping the number to 40% rather than 30%. So we'll see. But, when you have 323 companies out of the Fortune 1000 and S&P 500, you still have over 675 companies to honor. So we need to move the needle a little bit quicker. And the supply, do you think the supply is there?
Oh, absolutely. And you know that when I have had the privilege of being with Andrew or Becky, I've always said that it is not a supply issue. It absolutely is not.
Let me take you back to 2018 when you spoke to the Harvard Business School graduating class, and you gave this class, actually you wrote a letter to your younger self as though you were sitting in the audience, and you shared some lessons for them to succeed, and you gave some compelling messages. Could you give our audience really some of the key points you gave to that graduating class? Because I think they so apply to all of us today.
No, well, thank you. I'll give you 3. One was own your power. We all have power, and we so easily give it away unconsciously. And one of the ways we give it away is by letting others make us doubt whether or not we can actually do something. In that point, we give up our power right away in that second. So own your power, recognize that you have it and own it. Even if you're just starting out in an organization, they chose you for a reason because you're bringing intellect, experience, relationships to the table, and they believe you can make rain. So make rain. The second thing that I told them is that it is easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to beg for permission. Because one thing that I learned very early on is sometimes we ask people for permission to do things, and we ask people who don't even have the power to tell us no, but we gave them the power because we asked them the question. If you believe in your own intelligence that you should go forward with doing something, do the thing. Let somebody tap you on the shoulder and tell you, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Then you say, oh, I'm so sorry. That won't happen again. Didn't know. But now you've already had the experience. You've already had the experience and you know how to apply that the next time. And then the third thing that I'll tell you is I tell people, don't worry about making mistakes, because especially millennial professionals I find are deathly afraid of making a mistake. But don't be afraid of making a mistake. Making a mistake does not make you special. What makes you special is how and if you get up. And you'll be surprised how many people let mistakes become career limiting moves.
Yeah, Carla, one of the things you have spoken about too is being your authentic self. But I did read that along your career and a woman, being a Black woman, you were once told by a colleague that they didn't think you were tough enough. How did you overcome that while still being your authentic self?
Yes, I will tell you. And the two of these are tied. I always thought authentically, Janice, that I was tough. So the fact that this person was questioning whether or not I was tough enough was a wake-up call to me that the real Carla Harris, the authentic Carla Harris, was no longer walking into Morgan Stanley. Somewhere I'd lost my confidence and somewhere I'd lost my voice. And it was now creating a competitive disadvantage for me. So the point that I make in that pearl, and that's chapter 4 of Expect to Win, is perception as a co-pilot to reality. The point that I make is that, again, you can train people to think about you, as I said earlier, in the way that you want them to think about you. And because I wanted people to think of me as tough in that moment to get back to the real Carla, I decided I was going to walk tough, talk tough, eat tough, drink tough, use tough in my language so that I would train the organization to think about me in that way. And oh, by the way, I would remind myself of who I was authentically. And that's what I did. And sure enough, it worked. In about one quarter, people were definitely talking about me as somebody who was tough.
You know, and speaking about your powerful voice, I have seen you on stage at Carnegie Hall, at the Apollo Theater, but I read also that you toured with Harvard in their choir and you were overseas speaking to singing before a German audience, and they spoke no English, but you had them in tears practically with a song. And you learned that music transcends everything in any language. And it was a lesson for you, wasn't it, in terms of what music could do?
Absolutely. I will tell you that that was the summer of 1983, and it was the moment that I realized that music was, in fact, the universal language, because we were in Leipzig, East Germany, and I was with the Radcliffe Choral Society. It was my first time ever in Europe, first time ever out of the country. And I was singing a Negro spiritual called Ain't Got Time to Die.
Mm.
And I remember, again, I spoke no German. Many of us didn't speak any German. And because this was communist country at the time, many of them did not speak any English. And there they were with tears in their eyes, tears rolling down their faces at the very place you would have expected it if they understood English. And that I remember thinking, oh, wow, they get it. They get it. And just because of the way, I was singing the song and what the song was all about. And that's when I realized it was, in fact, universal. You don't have to speak the language. It's in the communication, of the notes and the music that the message gets across.
It's a wonderful story. Carla, any parting words, advice for our audience?
I would say that this is such a moment in time that each of us has an opportunity to advance the very best of who we are. It is not the time to be quiet. It is not the time, to second guess your own intellect. If you know that something needs to be done, if you know that you can improve whatever it is around your surroundings, you own your own power, use it. Use it aggressively now. And if you use it on somebody else's behalf, then the returns to all of us, not only to you, but to all of us, will be manifold.
Well, Carla Harris, Vice Chairman of Morgan Stanley, a colleague and friend. I've known you for many years.
Yeah.
You have been so impactful. You have helped so many people along the way. And I really thank you for being with us today, sharing your impressive path to success, your impactful stories. You do have a powerful voice on Wall Street, in the boardroom, and on stage. You are a world-renowned game changer, making us all more aware of the changes that need to occur, and really, empowering us and telling us we need to get out there and help with all that needs to be done in this world, individually and collectively. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. You are most welcome, and thank you for having me.
And thank you to our audience for tuning into this game-changing conversation with the remarkable, engaging, and authentic Carla Harris. And you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elliggroup.com. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes of Leadership Reimagined, Game-Changing Conversation, released on the third Thursday of each month and available on my website. Thank you for joining us today with Carla Harris.